It was a chilly Tuesday morning when Asuka, a 28-year-old waitress, opened the door to the small café she had been working at for some time in the heart of the city. It was small, out of the way of the busy streets, with the sweet smell of freshly brewed coffee in the air. It was just after noon, and the bell above the door jingled, indicating the arrival of a customer. Asuka looked up from wiping the counter, same as always, but it was what was standing there in the doorway that stopped her dead in her tracks. And then there was J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, a man known for his political acumen, his advocacy for the working class, and his unassuming demeanour, just right in front of her. His presence was unmistakable, a tailored suit, slightly rumpled, as if he had been travelling, and a look of quiet determination in his eyes. He almost looked out of place in this quaint café, as though he had entered the wrong building. Asuka stood as still as a statue for a moment, hardly believing her eyes. Of course she knew of him, who didn't? But she just never had occasion to think this type of man would walk into her small café. Still, she composed herself and smiled, heading over to the table he had taken by the window. "Good afternoon, Mr. Vice President. What can I get for you today?" she asked politely. J.D. looked up from his phone, glancing around as though he was trying to get his bearings. His eyes met Asuka's and he smiled faintly. "Just a coffee, black." "Thanks," he replied in a calm voice. Asuka nodded, making her way to the counter to prepare his order. As she did, she couldn't help but feel a little starstruck. It wasn't every day that the Vice President walked into your cafe, but she reminded herself that she was just here to do her job, serve him the coffee and move on. No big deal. Moments later, she returned to his table with the coffee. "Here you go," she said with a smile. J.D. glanced up, his eyes narrowing slightly. Before he could speak, the door to the cafe swung open once again, and a group of loud, boisterous men walked in. They didn't look like the typical cafe crowd. Their laughter echoed through the small space, and their demeanour was dismissive, almost confrontational. One of the men, clearly tipsy, approached J.D.'s table. "Well, if it isn't the great J.D. Vance," he sneered. "What are you doing in a place like this? Don't tell me you're slumming it with the little people now." Asuka, who had been at the counter, overheard the interaction and felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. She knew that kind of behaviour all too well. The man was mocking J.D., trying to belittle him in front of others. But what happened next was not something Asuka expected. Without hesitation, J.D. looked the man in the eye, his voice calm but firm. "I'm just enjoying a cup of coffee. You should try it sometime." The man wasn't satisfied with the response. He leaned in closer, his words dripping with arrogance. "I bet you think you're better than everyone here, don't you? Maybe you should take your power and go back to your mansion." Asuka could feel the tension in the air, her own hands trembling as she watched the exchange. It wasn't right. She couldn't just stand there and let someone talk to J.D. like that, especially when it was so clearly unprovoked. With a deep breath, Asuka walked over to the table. "Hey, that's enough," she said firmly, looking the man straight in the eyes. "You're being rude, and it's not okay." The man looked taken aback. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. His friends snickered, but he didn't back down. "And what are you going to do about it, waitress?" he challenged. Asuka stood her ground. "I'm going to tell you to leave, that's what. You don't get to treat people like that, no matter who they are." J.D., who had been quiet throughout the exchange, watched Asuka with a mixture of surprise and admiration. He wasn't used to seeing people stand up for him in such a public way, especially not someone in a job where standing up could easily lead to consequences. The man grumbled something under his breath before turning on his heel and storming out, his friends following behind him. The cafe went quiet again, the tension lifting. Asuka, feeling a rush of adrenaline, turned back to J.D.'s table. "I'm sorry about that," she said, trying to offer a reassuring smile. "Some people just don't know how to act." J.D. looked up at her, his expression thoughtful. "No, thank you. That was unexpected. But I appreciate you standing up for me." She moved to clean the other tables, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. She didn't know why, but she could sense that this moment, this act of kindness, was going to change her life. What happened next, however, was nothing short of extraordinary. Later that afternoon, as Asuka was finishing up her shift, her manager approached her with a stern look on his face. "Asuka, can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked. She followed him to the back of the cafe, her heart sinking. "What's going on?" "I'm afraid I have to let you go," he said, his voice cold. "You can't just confront customers like that. You've made things uncomfortable and we can't have that." Asuka's stomach dropped. She had always done her best to be polite and professional, but she had never imagined her attempt to stand up for someone would cost her the job. She tried to explain, but her manager was adamant. As she walked out of the cafe, her mind raced. She felt defeated, humiliated. She had stood up for what was right, only to lose the very thing she had worked so hard for. She wasn't sure what to do next. All she knew was that she needed a change, a new direction, something to get her out of this rut. What Asuka didn't know, however, was that J.D. Vance had been watching the entire interaction. As she walked down the street, trying to hold back the tears, she heard a familiar voice calling her name. "Asuka!" She turned around, startled to see J.D. approaching her. "Mr. Vice President?" she asked, wide-eyed. "Are you okay?" he asked, his tone genuine. Asuka nodded, but her heart was heavy. "I just lost my job because I stood up for you." J.D.'s face softened with concern. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said, "but I think you should know something." Asuka looked at him, confused. "I'm not just some random person," J.D. continued. "I noticed what you did today, and I don't think anyone should be punished for doing the right thing. You stood up for me when no one else would. That matters." Asuka was speechless. "I didn't do it for praise. I just couldn't let him talk to you like that." J.D. nodded. "Exactly. And that's why I'm going to make sure you're taken care of. You're not going to walk away from this empty-handed." With a flick of his wrist, J.D. made a few calls. Within hours, Asuka was offered a new job, a better-paying one at that. But that wasn't all. J.D. had also arranged for her to receive a generous severance package from her old job, ensuring she was financially stable as she transitioned into her new role. A few weeks later, Asuka received an invitation to an exclusive event, a gathering of policymakers, community leaders, and advocates for social change. As she entered the venue, she found herself face to face with J.D. once again. "Welcome, Asuka," he greeted her with a warm smile. "I'm glad you're here." Over the course of the evening, Asuka found herself engaging in conversations with some of the most influential people in the world. People who were making waves in politics, community organising and social justice. J.D. had personally ensured she was given a seat at the table, not just as a guest, but as someone who had earned her place there through her kindness, loyalty and courage. By the end of the night, Asuka found herself in a new world, one where her actions had opened doors she never thought possible. What started as a simple act of standing up for someone in a cafe had snowballed into an extraordinary new life, one full of opportunities, mentorship, and a future she had never imagined. In that moment, Asuka realised that sometimes standing up for what's right doesn't just change the world, it can change your life too. And thanks to a surprising twist of fate and a kind act from J.D. Vance, Asuka's life was no longer the predictable routine it once was. It was now a journey filled with endless possibilities. This story teaches us the power of courage, integrity, and kindness. Asuka's decision to stand up for what was right, even at great personal cost, ultimately led to a transformative change in her life. It reminds us that doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, can have profound and unexpected rewards. Additionally, J.D. Vance's recognition of Asuka's bravery and his willingness to support her highlights the importance of gratitude and paying it forward. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can ripple out and create significant impact both for ourselves and for others. If you enjoyed the story and found it meaningful, don't forget to leave a like. It really helps us reach more people. We'd also love to hear from you. Share your thoughts and the lessons you've learned in the comments below. Your insights could inspire someone else.